Welcome. Today we will explore the events that determined the fate of the Eastern Front at its very heart. Following the Battle of Stalingrad, when the Germans' invincibility disappeared and the Soviet Union began preparing for the subsequent epic struggle for victory. However, behind this apparent triumph lie uncertainties, dangerous strategic decisions, and unexpected maneuvers that could turn into catastrophe. And that is what we will discuss. You will hear how, within just 1 hour after the defeat at Stalingrad, the Red Guards liberated hundreds of kilometers, while at the same time, Hitler and Manstein secretly planned their moves, ignoring equipment exhaustion and growing resistance. Why could such ambitious plans, despite obvious difficulties, end in complete tragedy? How did Soviet commanders balance between dizzying offensives and dangerous overextension? And, most importantly, was there a chance to avoid encirclement and the death of thousands of soldiers? It's not just about the outcome of a battle, but the fate of millions, geopolitical interests, and the truth about who was truly conducting this fate-changing game. In this video, we will assemble all scattered facts, clarify the picture, and show who and how tried to deceive fate to end this dramatic episode in history with victory or tragedy. Are you ready to see what is hidden behind official versions and what secrets could change our understanding of the past? Then let's begin. At the end of February 1943, the first alarm bells began ringing on Soviet territory. In a small nearby village, on a country dirt road amid snowdrifts and fallen leaves, stood Ivan Morozov, a representative of a new era in Soviet military elite. He was writing a letter to his wife, which was more than just words, more than just a reminder. It was a literal message thrown into the quiet winter sky, a promise to return home, as his son's next birthday was approaching, and Ivan wanted to see his bright eyes, hear his laughter. But on the other side of the front line, contrary to his sincere words, there lurked inside him an anxiety that did not leave him for a minute. He was a witness and participant in epical events occurring on the Soviet-German front, during those incredible, long, then transforming into decisive weeks. It was an era when the fate of two great powers, their armies, and their destinies seemed to hang by a thread, and every decision could be fatal. The victorious Soviet offensive, after the fierce and bloody Battle of Stalingrad, was swift, confident, and seemingly unconditional. Lands seized by the Germans during the years of lightning-fast advances were quickly liberated. The liberated front lines reached Kharkov, and despite all difficulties, Moscow confidently signaled belief in victory in 1943. In this context, the people in command believed, if things are developing almost easier than expected, the day of ultimate freedom will come tomorrow. Part 2 of 15. The time frames were increasingly tightening, and hopes for a quick outcome filled the hearts of Soviet citizens, politicians, and commanders. Was this moment, the shift from defense to offense, merely the beginning of a grand catastrophe, or truly a harbinger of a decisive turning point? At this time, deep within Europe, in Berlin headquarters, amidst stone corridors and the glow of armored glass offices, Hitler and his faithful generals observed the rapid advance of Soviet troops. Echoes of battles, shell explosions, and the rumble of trains reached the generals' ears. And despite fatigue and worn-out troops, their belief in the possibility of a turn of events in their favor did not fade. Their strategic leader, Manstein, one of the most capable commanders of that era, leisurely watched the maps and documents, as if sipping strong coffee in his bunker. During times of crisis, when everything seems to be going awry, he attempts to revise tactics. His thoughts revolve around how to utilize mobility, cunning, and a rigid defense to exploit the enemy's numerical superiority and prevent him from establishing a firm foothold in the captured territories. German generals, including Manstein, faced a dilemma. In one hand was Hitler's order to hold positions at all costs, even if it meant exhausting mobilization of their last reserves, and in the other was their instinct to preserve the army's honor and effectiveness, without destroying the few remaining strongholds. An internal conflict burned like an active campfire. Manstein's genius, his intuition, and deep understanding of battle dynamics conflicted with the orders issued from above. It was this person, capable of executing a move that others deemed impossible, who could change the course of history. He understood clearly. If he could convince the command of the necessity for reasonable concessions and tactical retreats, there might still be a chance to emerge from the crisis with minimal losses. But his resistance to Hitler's orders, was not only a matter of professional honor, but also a reflection of the internal crisis within the German command corps, which realized that an offense based on rigid resistance could lead to total collapse. Meanwhile, at the heart of Soviet Moscow, in the halls where key military strategists gathered, developments were underway. One of the most ambitious and mysterious plans was Operation codenamed Gallop. Its purpose was to completely eliminate the Army Group South, liberate the Don Basin, and conclude the war within the year 1941. The plan was based on a swift strike, a lightning-fast offensive capable of breaking through the German defenses deep within their lines. Millions of lives were at stake, the fate of countless people hanging in the balance. Among the leadership, confidence was growing. Under certain conditions, with hopes of rapid progress, victory could become a reality. But the presence of hostile forces and logistical difficulties at that time did not fit into an optimistic scenario. Stalin was not free from the feeling that success was possible. He and his closest advisors paid little attention to the discouraging facts: resource depletion, worn-out equipment, logistical difficulties. They were confident, by overcoming obstacles, fatigue, worn-out machinery, logistical failures, we would achieve victory. Every decision, every order, thoughtful and deliberate, promised a swift triumph. However, contrary to their hopes, an internal crisis arose, triggered by the readiness of some commanders to take decisive action, and by the resistance they faced both on the battlefield and within the Kremlin's chambers. But it was precisely in such an environment that an impulse emerged, capable of changing everything. The internal conflict surrounding the development of Gallop, a huge gamble on a risky, daring, sometimes reckless plan, became what could either plunge the Soviet strategy into an abyss or lead to complete victory. Time was passing, and on the Russian front, days were approaching when the troops' own advice and logistics would become entangled in a web of uncertainty. Essentially, could one really count on the Soviet plan to deliver victory? Or was it risking to become a harbinger of yet another catastrophe, unless German commanders like Manstein could play their hand, take proper measures, and seize the initiative? The question, haunting the entire war, constantly hovered in the air, and there was only one thing that could turn the tide: a swift, lightning-fast capture of Kharkov, the possibility of taking Hitler prisoner, which could fundamentally alter the course of history. But fate decreed otherwise. A chain of events had formed within the defensive lines and logistical hubs that could no longer be stopped. And now, on the brink of a new battle, as the Soviet army approached Kharkov, this crucial point, meant to become a turning point, fate hung even more precariously by the thinnest thread of chance. The prospect of capturing Hitler alive, a reputational and strategic blow, could have overturned the entire war. But due to mistakes, misunderstandings, and human destiny, this opportunity disappeared. And the only question remains: what would have happened if Manstein and his allies had not made mistakes, and the Soviet Gallop plan had not turned into a hasty gamble? Could that very victory have been not only possible, but also a guarantee to change everything? Or did fate, like a capricious judge, decide to leave these possibilities only in dreams and hypotheses, leading history down a different path? These questions, overshadowing the events of those tumultuous days, find no definitive answers. However, their analysis shows history moved on thin ice, and those standing on it were ready to step carefully along the edge because the price could prove to be too high. In January and February of 1943, hearts across millions were galvanized by a long-anticipated battle that had begun long ago, which during those months reached new scales, edged towards a state of expectant aggression, and seemed poised to determine the outcome of the entire campaign. During these years when the World War raged on all fronts, bringing daily destruction and suffering, Soviet forces under the command of the brilliant and fearless General Vatutin launched a wide, bold, and decisive strike against the German front in the southern regions of Ukraine. This was not merely another operation. It was a demonstration of tactical confidence born of relentless preparation and a showcase that, despite obvious difficulties, Soviet command was ready to tactically expand the front, piercing German defenses and daily asserting its strength on the continent's map. On January 29th, in a cold winter day, as if igniting the internal engine of strategic offensives, Vatutin's troops launched an operation later dubbed Gallop. The name was no accident, as it promised speed, surprise, and almost uncontrollable movement. Like a swift corsair breaking through the enemy's line in southern Ukraine, nearly at the enemy's border of power. 35 divisions, totaling 25,500 soldiers, marched forward under the cover of more than 500 tanks, which at that time was an unimaginable force for such an operation. In a dazzling march filled with freezing air, Soviet commanders employed the full power and coordination of armored systems, demonstrating a striking confidence in their strike force that their enemies could not match. Before the eyes of those engaged in this battle were lines of Soviet fighters, focused on firing lines, their faces, hidden behind icy coldness, concealed tremors of faith in victory, while behind them spread fields with destroyed structures, shattered sanatoriums, and dying people near snowdrifts, left unprotected that very night. The fight involved not only tanks and infantry, but also fates, hopes, and plans that previously seemed invincible. On the very first day, as if by magic, Soviet forces reached their target, breaking through the German defensive line near Krasny Liman. This bridgehead became an immediate symbol of breakthrough. Burnt trophies, wrecked equipment, abandoned enemy tents and sanatoriums frozen on the snow, all testified to the unwavering resolve of the indomitable Soviet soldiers. The remnants of German defenses did not merely indicate defeat, they signaled the beginning of a new era in this war. Krasny Liman fell, and behind it opened the road to a strategic breakthrough, more than 85 kilometers in a single day, an unprecedented achievement in recent years. Tearing through space, T-34 and T-70 tanks, which were not only weapons but also symbols of the era's strength and progress, sliced the battlefield in their unstoppable stride. Part 5 of 15. A rapid, almost explosive breakthrough expanded the capabilities of the Soviet forces. Their equipment, like a whirlwind, tore through the enemy, increasing this line of success and boosting confidence in victory. And at the moment when days turned into nights, Soviet troops were capturing new territories, such as Zaporizhia. This industrial giant with its strategic bridges became the next target. Soon, under the pressure of the Soviet armies, the Dnipropetrovsk and Mariupol railway cuts, vital transportation arteries, came under control. These railway lines were not just communication routes, they were the lifeblood of the entire German-Soviet battle, linking the front, ensuring supplies, and maintaining the enemy's combat readiness. Breaking this line was fateful. It was not only a strategic victory but also a psychological blow to the German defenses. Soldiers and officers wrote home letters that pierced the heart of Soviet propaganda, voicing optimistic messages. "The fascists are retreating," they said. For millions, those words meant hope that the war was nearing its end. "We are heading to Berlin," they wrote, confidently and with faith in victory, which they already called imminent. But every force, even the most powerful, is always threatened by the unexpected, and the German command under Manstein, who was difficult to suspect of weakness, also recognized the danger of impending chaos. This talented general, a former Hitler strategist on many fronts, acknowledged the danger posed by the breakthrough front, had witnessed the successes of the Soviet armies, and at the same time understood that this success was not the final victory, but only half of the battle. His efforts to turn the situation into a defensive operation clashed with reality. The enemy had achieved significant gains, and time was working against him. Manstein knew If he couldn't rapidly mobilize forces, if decisive measures weren't taken, the Soviet breakthrough could turn into a serious crisis. But more than that, a strategy was forming in his mind. To prepare a trap that would change the entire strategic situation. This moment seemed to be on the verge. Time appeared to be on their side. Confidence in victory was growing, and all questions boiled down to one. Had the Soviet breakthrough reached such a scale that it could truly turn the course of the war? Or was it all an illusion, frozen for ages in memory and propaganda reports? The high level of achieved success raised questions that could confuse even the most experienced observers. Within the command headquarters, doubts and hopes floated simultaneously, and all the real figures and facts, in essence, formed a dizzying picture. Was it a sign of strength or a symptom of vulnerability? This question became central in their minds, but most importantly, nothing was so simple. Behind the lines, beyond the front, a new danger was beginning to take shape. The Germans, feeling the loss of such an important position, reported preparations for a counteroffensive, about sudden and decisive actions that could change the entire game. They seized the moment of tension, and their command was prepared for a trap that could turn defeat into an advantage. And this became the key, because deep down, the Central Forces struggled not only with faith in victory, but also with fear. Fear that behind this brilliant, fleeting breakthrough lies a trap that could change the fate of the front. The offensive, like the flight of a stone, was fraught with danger. The German command, superior in tactics and planning, was not going to miss the opportunity. It was gathering forces as if along an incorrect line, preparing its counterattack. Time became an ally of the enemy, and this was no coincidence. In this strategic game of decisions with enormous consequences, victory or defeat is decided at the most unexpected moment. While some spoke of victory, others prepared for a new confrontation, which could become their last chance to restore the balance of power. This contains all the tragedy and all the beauty of this heavy war. Seemingly, a major success was achieved, but underneath its shadow lurked danger, creeping like a shadow, waiting for the moment of complete rehabilitation with an unexpected blow. Such a moment could become a turning point in a battle that seemed decided, but was never truly over. In midwinter of 1943, the Eastern Front found itself at the center of changes that could determine the outcome of the entire war. Soviet forces continued their relentless advance, reaching a strategic point, Zhovneva, and breaking further south, creating a dangerous and unstable situation for the German command. It was a moment when stakes were higher than usual, and the decision on further actions could either lead to defeat or offer a chance for survival. Inside the German headquarters, debates and disagreements raged in secret, a conflict between tactical considerations and strategic vision, between the desire to hold every position and the need to retreat to preserve combat capability. The German command prepared for countermeasures, which was logical and justified against the backdrop of increasing pressure from Soviet armies. During this fight for every street and every height, the SS Division, Viking, and 7 tank divisions, brought into action to block the advancing Soviet forces, participated. These units fought to their limits, becoming a symbol of persistence and tenacity, hiding internal cracks. At the same time, a contentious concept was emerging. On one side, Manstein, the commander of the grouping, who argued for using offensive potential to retreat, breaking out of encirclement and preserving resources. On the other, Hitler, making the decision to hold every position at any cost. He saw every fortified line as a symbol of resistance, a manifestation of resilience and steadfastness. Hitler stubbornly insisted that all defenses remain in place, fearing losses and believing that each meter of land was part of his imperial pride. But it was precisely this decision that became a stumbling block. In those who were in every German headquarters, alarm signals were increasingly heard. In foreign German units, especially those monitoring the movements of Soviet forces, troubling reports appeared. Soviet troops were approaching the locations where Hitler himself was present. Evidence showed that his command posts, his personal security, everything was under threat, and this factor was growing more and more intense internal tension. The internal confrontation reached a climax. Manstein received a personal order to use the opportunity to retreat in order to preserve combat-ready units, a command that contradicted Hitler's rigid stance. At this critical moment, a confrontation unfolded. A problem crystallized that would determine the fate of German tactics on the Eastern Front. Could stubbornness, the prolonged fight to the last, a struggle for each inch of land, even if surrounded and doomed, lead to a strategic catastrophe for Germany? Or, conversely, could this tactic, perhaps a delay aimed at preserving combat-capable units, give the Germans a chance for a counterattack, for a possible change in the situation? The question hung in the air. Was Hitler's strict line, fighting to the last drop of blood, a strategic mistake or a difficult but necessary decision? Was it possible to break out of encirclement without significant losses? Or did the fierce internal war within the German command condemn them to defeat from the outset? The crisis at Zeppelin, this narrow mountain gorge where one of the central points of the German defense was situated, transformed the highest German command into a trap. Here, in one of the most intense battles of the war, two fates clashed, one moving forward regardless of everything, and the other trying to preserve the remnants of strength to continue resistance. Inside the narrow barracks and anxiety-filled bunkers, a struggle was underway that was not just military but a fight for survival, the meaning of strategy, and for future decisions that could change the course of history. At this moment, it became clear. The choice between resilience and retreat was not merely a tactical dilemma. It was a decisive turning point, on which the fate of not only the front, but all of Germany depended. This moment revealed that within the German command, threads of contradiction were stretched, and that the conflict between strategy and tactics was not only a matter of intellect, but also a matter of human will, fear, and determination. And while the battle on the Eastern Front was being discussed, broader historical forces whispered behind the scenes. Political instability, internal disagreements within the leadership, and growing isolation. At this moment, it seemed that the most important thing was not just to hold the front line, but to preserve reason, to achieve unity in thoughts and actions, because any mistake could be fatal. And all this was happening against the backdrop of a global war, fought beyond the battlefields, for ideas and ideals, for honor and survival, for that heavy, incomparable burden of responsibility. The hours were approaching when every commander, every colonel, and every political officer understood. Today, right now, the fate of their country was being decided not on this or that front line, but within their own souls. And in this struggle, in this drama, not only weapons and resources stood behind every decision, but also human destinies, fears, and hopes. This was a decisive moment, a moment when heroism and fear intersected, when it was not only tactics and strategy that were at stake, but the very essence of the human spirit under the relentless pressure of ruthless war. The question remains, could the fight to the last drop of blood become salvation? Or did this very resistance, in essence, foreshadow their doom? Time revealed that within this symbiosis of determination and despair lay a hidden truth. The path to victory or defeat was determined not only by external circumstances, but also by an internal divide that ultimately could lead to inevitable catastrophe. In the dark, shattered silence of the night, like a distant hurricane, the clash of voices and commands filled the command halls, suffused with the smell of sweat, cigarette smoke, and nervous anticipation. A tense strategy hung in the air, with anxiety inflating every nerve in the command posts, as one of the key operations of this endlessly bloody conflict was on the agenda. The German initiative to encircle Soviet forces, capable of turning the tide of the battle, providing a brief but necessary respite, and determining the fate of the front for several months ahead. For several hours, beneath the roar of artillery explosions and the cracking of railroad chains, a new page in military tactics was slowly but surely taking shape, one devised by Manstein. February 19, 1943. A date inscriptions in history as a moment of change, triggered by the shouts of commanders and the persistent pleas of the German general. Manstein, a commander with cool reasoning and iron will, obtained permission to carry out a unique tactical operation that, if not to guarantee victory, at least to give a chance to dispel the illusion of absolute dominance among the Soviet advancing masses. The permission was granted after lengthy discussions and delicate negotiations, when the noise of fighting for every inch of land absorbed all communication, ideas and hopes alike. Manstein waited, analyzed, smoothing out the pulsations of nerve currents, and behind all this stood a strategic calculation: to conduct a mobile defense, allowing not just to hold the position but to exploit the unreliability of Soviet persistence, to deceive, confuse, and mislead. German troops began preparations for what would later be called the encirclement maneuver. South, west, and east, three sides, like enormous tentacles, stretched toward the shattered lines of the Soviet armies. Part 9 of 15. German divisions, infantry units, mechanized corps, war machines of wind, dust devils, iron thunder, were entering the battlefield, destined by fate to serve as a wedge between the mad mass of the enemy and strategic positions that could become their grave. This was a tactic devised to stop, deceive, and divide. Hearing the whistle of shells and understanding that what lay ahead was not a path to victory, but a cunning trap. This became the message of the German commanders. Their last chance was to lure the enemy into a trap, wait out, retreat, and strengthen new positions, all to preserve their forces for the next blow. After hours of tense discussions, paralyzed nerve cells, and shouts in their remote headquarters, the decisive word finally came. Hitler, who had once dozed amidst his aggressive ambitions, authorized a movement that would ultimately lead to catastrophe or salvation. Elastic defense. This term entered history. It meant not just withdrawal, but a strategic deployment of troops, preparing for spontaneous actions, a cunning defensive thrust. It provided Manstein with a tool to lure the enemy, make them feel false superiority, and then, when the enemy believed they had won, suddenly turn the defense into a counteroffensive. German troops slowly but decisively began to vacate their initial positions. Every step was deliberate and thoughtful, as if prepared 3 moves ahead. Morning marches, the sound of heels on sand, the rustle of towels folded in cover. Everything was orchestrated as part of a new tactical ballet, where each soldier knew his role. As part of the prepared maneuvers, the hussars of the German forces, SS divisions and infantry, retreated in groups, reinforcing upcoming defensive lines. Meanwhile, reconnaissance units and sabotage squads deliberately spread disinformation, sowing fear and uncertainty among Soviet commanders. Evidence of their work was irrefutable. Radio signals, false reports, fake command centers, all created to make the enemy lose their bearings. At the same time, the situation on Soviet positions was unfolding differently than planned. The commanders, likely based on errors and misunderstandings, believed that German panic had peaked. The offensive pace intensified. It seemed as if the Germans were fleeing, abandoning everything to fate, and very soon, they would lose all capacity to resist or counterattack. According to sources and witnesses of that era, field commanders and scouts' confessions, it was a clever game of the mind. The German retreat started as a doomed pit, deliberately dug under their own feet, intended to turn into a trap. At the critical moment of the narrative, when it seemed the Germans would vanish from the battlefield entirely, their tactic, akin to an intricate web, took an unexpected turn. They turned waste into an ingenious hideout, created an illusion of panic and confusion to distract the enemy, and prepared the next step, a strategic breakout. Through their skillful play on the edge of troop psychology, the enemy found themselves trapped in their own illusions, while the Germans, disguising their true intentions, slowly but confidently gathered strength for the next strike. It was this complex game, a balance between chaos and order, between panic and coolness, that determined whether the meticulously planned encirclement operation would end as a tragedy for the Soviet troops or as a triumph for the Germans. The question remained open. Could German tactics, their ability to maneuver flexibly, give them a temporary advantage? Or was this merely an illusion of strategic flexibility, created under cover of misinformation and clever distractions? Within this tension lay the true essence of the struggle for tactical superiority, the concealment of real intentions, and the fight for a single moment, both beyond the battlefield and within the consciousness of commanders awaiting their decisive move. The Soviet command's deception, caused by the German withdrawals, was not just a tactical ruse. It became a kind of layer that paved the way for the Germans to prepare for their next major offensive. This complex, masterfully designed theater of war, filled with illusions and reality, held the opponents in captivity. A captivity of fear, distrust, and anticipation. In this context, every retreated kilometer, every piece of disinformation, every deception became not just a tactical element, but part of a strategic game, where not only territory, but the fate of entire armies and eras were at stake. For it was in these seemingly temporary chess moves that their true strength lay. And when the bloody dust finally settled, and the enemy believed in the victory of the maneuver, closed ranks, the artificial sense of advantage faded away. At that moment, it seemed that the German retreat was still part of a cunning plan, prepared to open the way for the next strike. And it indeed did, opening a new chapter in this endless, tragic game where tactics gradually turned into strategy and strategy into a game of survival. That fierce winter of the 20s, February 20, 1943, the destiny of thousands of Soviet soldiers was sealed within the iron embrace of encirclement, like a treacherous labyrinth woven from steel walls of German tactics and ruthless strategic decisions. In the pale light of the winter moon, behind the cold shadow of night, the 7th and 11th Tank Divisions of Nazi Germany encircled the last strongholds of Soviet defense. Those who tried to hold the line, those who refused to flee, who, despite exhaustion, complete lack of fuel and resources, continued to fight. It was the epilogue, the final chapter of a massive Red defensive campaign, a stage in which the enemy's full strength was rapidly contracting, transforming into a dense ball of blades and flames ignited at the heart of the Eastern Front. The worried yet desperate Soviet command refused to acknowledge the fact of capitulation, even confirming it with blood and smoke from the surrounding ruins. Retreat was betrayal, and escape was disgrace. A firmly rooted stereotype had taken hold in their minds. A soldier does not surrender. He defends the motherland to the last drop of blood. It was during this time that commanders in closed offices, soaked in coldness and malice, made difficult decisions. No step back, no weakness. The loss of equipment, depletion of reserves, lack of fuel, all of this was perceived as temporary hardships, as tests of wrath and faith. Their strategy was simple but brutal: encircle, destroy, and deny the enemy any chance of escape. For them, it was not just tactics, but a triumph of the idea of invincibility. Fighting, even at the brink of annihilation, meant holding the line at any cost. But among those encircled, where every minute could be their last, a different reality emerged, which convincingly demonstrated that tactics and strategy do not always intersect, do not always align. In the very first battle for Krasnoarmeyskoye and Pavlograd, losses were recorded at record rates. Hundreds of killed and wounded, thousands of destroyed vehicles, carts, armored personnel carriers, tanks, turned into scrap metal or given as charity to the enemy. City after city, village after village, Soviet forces were forced to fight not only the enemy, but also the horror of the inevitable death awaiting them. In these battles, not only people perished, tech, hopes, and plans for the future also died. Their losses decorated the snow with bones and smoke. The awareness of surrounding despair and hopelessness bore a heavy burden. Inside Commander Popov, a tense communication constantly sounded, the only voice warning of the situation, carrying messages about the dire circumstances and the urgent need for help. But at the moment when their fate had already been sealed, when only the final blow remained to be awaited, the answers grew more and more negative, harsh, and unfeeling. Communication was cut off. Hope was melting away. Evidence of their helplessness was undeniable. Help had not come. Their warmth, their chances, all had been destroyed by the front lines, hundreds of kilometers between them and those who could help. At that moment, when the dark shadows of German tanks gradually drew closer, and it seemed that their fighting spirit had turned to nothing, projectiles rained down without fail, and the cobblestones of frozen streets turned into a battlefield. Most Soviet fighters made a difficult decision: to run, to escape, or to surrender. It was impossible to avoid tragedy. It became inevitable, like a clockwork mechanism into which the fates of millions had been wound. Supply lines fell apart like strings stretched too tightly. Part 12 of 15. The equipment was destroyed to the last detail or captured to mock the victory. Folders with maps, combat orders, trucks with food and medicine. Everything disappeared in flames or in the hands of the enemy. Millions of soldiers found themselves in despair. Some taken prisoner, others thrown behind the front lines, freezing in snowy nights. The entire scene of their final struggle was filled with screams of pain, the noise of approaching death, the crackling ice beneath their feet, and the heavy breathing of the last remaining men whose iron spirit had not yet been exhausted. As a result of this bloody finale, everything within the fortified walls was destroyed. Popov's group was annihilated. The losses, enormous, counting in hundreds of thousands, are not just numbers. They are human fates, shattered families, lost lives, burned hopes. This was a large-scale strategic failure, which will forever be remembered in history as a vivid reminder. The enemy proved stronger not only in fire and blood, but also in cunning and ruthless planning, in the ability to hold the enemy by a thin thread, in anticipation and exploitation of weaknesses. In this fire and ice, at this point of collision, one era comes to an end. But it's essential not to overlook the main question looming over this bloody scenario. Could this tragic encirclement have been foreseen and prevented? Or was everything predestined by strategy and the impossibility of changing the course of events, despite internal disagreements and weak command coordination? What was the essence of this strategic imperfection? What was the price of failing to organize the withdrawal of troops in time? And most importantly, who is to blame for the fact that the fate of thousands was decided in cold, abandoned, hopeless nights? Amidst this drama, through bloody tears and scorched lives, a deeper, elusive meaning emerges, one that goes beyond military tactics. Encirclement defeat is not only about fighting the enemy, not just about rapid destruction of equipment and lives. It is a lesson forever engraved in history about how vital it is to have clear planning, timely decisions, the ability to retreat, to listen to the voices of reason rather than solely military zeal, and how deadly dangerous the very idea of unshakable obstinacy is. Because the one stronger in fire is not always undefeated in foresight and retreat. The story of this final encirclement act became a brutal testament. The enemy, seemingly less numerous, less prepared, turned out to be much more adaptable, cunning, and organized. And this paradigm shift, a break that forever altered perceptions of military power, strategy, and planning. Because even in the bleakest moments, in the most hopeless situations, it is not only the weapon that matters, but also the ability to anticipate, make tough decisions, and leave at the right time. Otherwise, defeat ceases to be a chance event and becomes a pattern that guarantees oblivion. In February 1943, when Soviet troops, after long months of fierce fighting and strategic maneuvers, suffered an unprecedented collapse in scale, it seemed that the fate of the offensive was already definitively decided. The catastrophe that struck the front as a result of an unsuccessful operation called Gallop was not just another defeat. It was an event that cast a shadow of doubt over the entire Soviet strategic line, questioned its overall concept, and forced a re-evaluation of possible future scenarios. The world saw how merciless the enemy forces, the German army besieging the Soviet front, not only maintained their positions after this blow, but also gained an opportunity to renew their offensive actions, while Soviet forces were drained, disorganized, and on the brink of total defeat. However, even amidst the shadow of this tragic event, there emerged an understanding that fate itself had not sealed the outcome of the struggle once and for all. The Gallop disaster turned out to be not a final point, but rather a temporary delay that gave Soviet strategic thought a chance to re-examine its approaches, adjust its plans, and prepare forces for further countermeasures. Manstein, the German general embodying skill and cunning, used this gain time to restore his positions in Kharkov, which by then had become the center of an important strategic point. He understood the enemy would not vanish after indications of defeat. They know the value of time. They know how to use every second to improve their positions, strengthen flanks, and plan future strikes. Meanwhile, in Moscow, among the leadership, a growing awareness was emerging. Deep breakthroughs without secure flanks, without reliable logistics, and without strong defensive lines was a strategic mistake that could be costly, and they began to realize this not just in words, but in practical decisions, which would later be reflected in a new strategy for the fight for Soviet land. The defeat in the Gallop operation became a bloody lesson from which not only lessons were learned, but also an understanding developed to listen to one's own intuition, to heed strategies indicating that quick and risky offensives require not only bravery, but also careful analysis of each line, each option, and each chance for success. By March, when the enemy seemed to be fully exhausted and pushed back, German forces, as a result of their efforts, not only maintained control over Kharkov, but also regained the ability to strengthen their front line. Fortified defenses reappeared, prepared to repel future Soviet counterattacks. The atmosphere on the front intensified, and commanders' advice and strategists' analyses showed that at this stage, the German command still had strength and the capacity to alter the course of combat actions in their favor. The entire moment became a dangerous point that could have escalated into a new phase of the struggle if Soviet leaders had not drawn the right conclusions. Nevertheless, it was precisely at this catastrophic juncture that an important turning point began. Lessons of defeat, these bloody, bitter lessons, became a springboard for further strategy. After Operation Gallop, the Soviet army, recognizing the mistakes of its speed and ambitions, shifted to a new tactic, the so-called wait and prepare strategy. Amidst this overall struggle for superiority on the front, among ruthless battles and strategic maneuvering, an idea took shape. There is no room for haste, no need to risk the entire strategy for a selfish breakthrough. Steady preparation, thorough fortification of flanks, and deep analysis of logistics lines were required. Only in this way could they correct the errors that had cost dearly in the 20th century. From this era of struggle, from this bloody, brutal fight for every bright victory, emerged a prerequisite for the future battle, which would be called the course of destiny, the Battle of Kursk. There, the enemy was again repelled, and Soviet troops no longer engaged in risky breakthroughs, but carefully prepared their defenses. The experience of this operation became the foundation for conducting a large-scale strategic defense, which then evolved into a powerful counterattack. This complex and painful path taught the Soviet command, reevaluating the pace of movements, abandoning dubious ambitions, acknowledging flawed tactics. All these became the cornerstones on which future victory was built. Analysis shows that the lessons of the past, the harshest, bloodiest lessons, confirm a universal truth. Overestimating one's strength, a desire to act quickly without proper preparation, leads to a major strategic catastrophe. In an era when the fate of the world hangs in the balance, every calculated mistake can result in the death of millions, and every correct tactic is a nail in the enemy's coffin. This fact is confirmed not only by historical experience, but also by modern military strategy, where scientists and military experts always emphasize that speed, without accounting for logistics and defense, can destroy an entire successful operation. The central question that becomes clear after experiencing these dramas and mistakes is, could Stalin and his strategists foresee the traps organized by Manstein and adjust their operations in time? Could they understand that this German general, a master of disguise and the spoiling attack tactic, was preparing a trap that could lead to ruin if decisive measures were not taken? And if the leadership had been able to more accurately assess the situation, conduct a thorough analysis, and adjust tactics, perhaps they could have avoided the bloodshed that took tens of thousands of lives. This question will forever remain one of the central issues in studies of those fateful days. How close did our strategists come to catastrophe? Did they have enough intelligence to notice the lurking trap? And most importantly, could they have changed the course of history? Time, intellect, strategic foresight, and the ability to listen to one's intuition, all of these were decisive at that moment. Many witnesses testify that the final decisions to continue offensives were often made based on emotional impulsiveness rather than thorough analysis, leading the command into a dangerous trap. Learned from bitter experience, Soviet leaders drew crucial lessons. This lesson became a turning point, both in military tactics and strategic thinking. By reorganizing their methods, they began to abandon risky, ill-conceived operations, focusing instead on preparation, strengthening positions, and creating reliable flanks. And this shift, which initially seemed slow, became the key to future successes. After long months of preparation and error analysis, the Soviet army was eventually able to go on the offensive, changing the course of the war and ending the bloody struggle for every meter of territory, which during the Gallop period had nearly deprived them of their future. This is where the main lesson of the tragedy lies. Overestimating speed, ambitions, and plans without thorough preparation leads to a large-scale strategic catastrophe. This truth becomes clear for all subsequent generations, whose eyes followed the course of the war, and for those who today analyze armed conflicts around the world. Because history teaches that rapid advances, without accounting for all factors, without protecting flanks and logistics, can turn into a tragedy that negates all attempts at change and victory. Time shows that only careful preparation, sound analysis, and the ability to reconsider one's mistakes enable a transition from defeats to great victories. This is the key to understanding the entire tragedy that unfolded in that harsh, relentless era. And the lesson drawn from the bloody pages of history remains relevant today, reminding us that foresight and meticulous planning can change the fate not only of an individual army or country, but of the entire global order.